because that's the object feminine pronoun, isn't it? Because if you use the subject feminine pronoun, it would have a completely different meaning altogether. Because you don't say her goes to the shops, do you? No? No one got that one? No? That's pretty good. Yeah, I got it. Yeah. Anyway, what were we talking about? Trump, weren't we? I would rather have a senile Ronald Reagan in the White House now, to be honest, because I feel a lot safer. Well, I forgot the nuclear codes again. It's the third time today. And who put the US Constitution in the refrigerator? Not a lot of answers to that one, weren't there? A couple of titters here and there from people who know who Ronald Reagan is, but generally a sort of pervasive silence, wasn't it? Because he had Alzheimer's disease, didn't he, Ronald Reagan, towards the end, and that's why the joke works. I took an ordinary domestic situation with an elderly relative suffering from Alzheimer's, and sort of they forget stuff, don't they? They leave things lying around, they forget they put them there. And I changed it, didn't I, to make it satirical. Oh, for fuck's sake! Trying to do something good, and people just sit there. Not used to that sort of fucking humour, are we here? Spend all our time getting pissed and mindlessly bitching about people behind their back. Somebody tried to do something good and they fucked it up. Let's laugh at them so we can avoid confronting our own pathetic inadequacy. Alzheimer's disease, not a laughing matter, is it? There's nothing funny about Alzheimer's disease, is there? Despite the fact that I'm about to do a 50-minute comedic routine about Alzheimer's disease. A lot more reporting about Alzheimer's now, isn't there, in the media? Sort of a lot of personal stories from relatives of people who've been affected by Alzheimer's disease, sort of raise awareness of the condition. And you get sort of like a variety of stories, don't you? You get people who sort of focus on the tragic stuff towards the end when they've completely forgotten who they are, they don't recognise anyone. Then you get all like some people who try and look at the funny side and they go, I know I shouldn't laugh, I had to repeat the question 5 times in 2 minutes, and I shouldn't laugh, but what else can I do? And there's other people who try and sort of take a sort of positive view of it as well. They try and look at there's something uplifting about the whole thing. And they sort of like, all the family sort of gathered round towards the end and we all sort of bonded in a different way. And that was a good thing to come out of it. And everyone's got their own sort of different sort of take on Alzheimer's, haven't they? And I've got an Alzheimer's story that is neither uplifting, wryly amusing or tragic. It's simply fucking terrifying. It's one of the worst ordeals that I've ever experienced in my life, to be honest. Because my granddad had Alzheimer's, and when I was about 10 years old, I was staying with my auntie Susan, my dad's sister, and my granddad was there at the same time as I was, and she was a very difficult woman, Auntie Susan. She was quite controlling, quite stubborn. Found it very difficult to sort of change her views on stuff. And everyone else in the family had sort of accepted that my granddad had Alzheimer's. It was only a matter of time before there was a complete mental degeneration. But Susan didn't seem to sort of understand what Alzheimer's was. She didn't grasp the concept of it. And she thought that she could sort of reverse the disease by forcing him to do things that he was no longer capable of doing. Like, she'd send him to the shops and without a shopping list, and he'd come back empty-handed. And she'd start fucking screaming at him because he'd forgotten. And that was a terrible way to deal with the whole thing. And on this one occasion, I was staying at her place. It got to about 5 or 6 in the evening, and she was supposed to drive me home. But for whatever reason, she decided that she couldn't do it. And so she said, don't worry, your granddad will drive you home. And I was only 10, but I was still sort of aware of what Alzheimer's was, and I wasn't very comfortable with this. And I said, look, Susan, I don't feel comfortable getting in a car with Grandad, because, anything might happen. And then she started having a go at me, and said that I was a selfish little shit, and I'd obviously been spoiled by my parents. I don't know what that had to do with anything, but then she started to cast doubt on my paternity, and said that in her younger days, my mum was a well-known slapper, and she doubted we'd ever know who my real father was. And I started crying, right? And then my cousin Jane, Susan's daughter, 17-year-old cousin Jane, she came down the stairs because she heard the commotion. She said, what's going on here? She said, this little shit won't get in a car with Grandad. And Jane said, well, I don't think it's a good idea for him to get in a car with Grandad, but I'll drive them, because I've got my provisional driving licence. And in the UK, they give you a provisional licence before you get your full licence, which means you can drive on the road but only in the company of an adult with a full licence. He said, I'll do it, Grandad can go with me and I'll drive. And Susan was absolutely fucking adamant that my Grandad was going to drive me home. Jane said, okay, fine, but I'll go with them and I'll sit in the passenger seat just in case something happens. And we got in the car for about 5 or 10 minutes, it was all sort of fine. He was lucid, he knew what was going on. And then we got to this sort of big roundabout, and it's a very complicated roundabout, 6 or 7 different exits. And it's easy to make a mistake. And he came off on the wrong exit, and he ended up on the motorway. And he was going quite fast, he was about 85, 90 miles an hour. And then he started screaming, "Where's Margaret? Where's Margaret? Where's Margaret?" And he was referring to my Nana Margaret, who died about 18 months previously. And obviously I was only 10 years old, so my first instinct was to tell the truth and say, she's dead, Grandad. Have you forgotten? And Jane sort of preempted that I might do this, and she turned around and said, shh, don't say anything. Because I didn't know this at the time, but Jane did. Apparently, when the news was originally broken to him that Nana Margaret had died, he was so devastated, my dad had to talk him down from the roof of IKEA. And Jane reached the conclusion that to break the news to him again, while he was already scared and confused, driving a car at almost 100 miles an hour could be potentially deadly. So she had to sort of think on her feet. And the thing about Jane was, everyone used to say she looked like Nana Margaret. They had similar facial features, similar hair colour, and stuff like that. And when they were sort of the same age, about 17, early 20s, that sort of thing. And Jane turned to him and said, don't worry, Pete, I'm here. And he looked at her and he bought it. That sort of pacified him for a while. Another thing about Jane was she'd already decided she wanted to be an actress. And she'd done about a year of drama courses at school for her A-level. So she was used to sort of improvising situations, improvising dialogue. And she was a very different character from my Auntie Susan. Because she was just a fucking bitch. Making me get in a car with a senile old man, ready to tell my mum she could be rummaging around their handbag, even though I haven't. Fat cow as well. Got diabetes now, no one sympathised. On the phone to my mum, whinging. Anyway, so Jane was a very sort of positive person, very different from my mother, had a very sort of optimistic, generous, warm sort of personality. And she was the sort of person who had the attitude that she looked at a crisis as an opportunity. So in many ways she was the ideal person to have in the car at that time. So the way she looked at it was, not only can I prevent my granddad from committing a reckless act of suicide, I can also hone my acting skills. So, perfect person to have in the car. And so, for about sort of the first 5 minutes or so, she was trying to sort of establish a context, trying to figure out what he thought was happening. So she was asking a couple of questions, sort of, what they do when people get Alzheimer's. They say, you know, like, when were you born and stuff like that. And she said to him, I can't remember exactly what she said, but she said something like, who's the president of Russia? And he said, Russia doesn't have a president, it's ruled by the General Secretary of the Communist Party, Nikita Khrushchev. And it transpired that he thought it was 1955, and that he was driving to my Nana and Grandad's caravan in Wales. And Jane reached the conclusion that we had a better chance of survival if she improvised a highly complex narrative arc for 2 hours than bring him back to reality. And so I was sat in the back of the car watching an improvised dialogue between my demented grandfather and my 17-year-old cousin in the guise of my dead grandmother. And so the sort of first 5 or 10 minutes, she was sort of talking, we sort of found out a lot of stuff about like the nature of their relationship that we didn't know about, stuff about them from their younger days. It was quite touching in a way, getting to know them in a different way. And it became apparent quite early on that when he was younger, he had a ravenous sexual appetite. And at one point he started to get quite irritable, and he insisted on pulling over into a service station so that he could have sex with Jane. And obviously she didn't want to break character, but she needed to find her way out of this. And it's contrived, isn't it? And she didn't want to break character. So she said, I'm not in the mood, Pete. I've got a headache. And he went, you always fucking say that. Right, I've got a headache, you're too tired. When you do want to do it, you do it with the lights off, and you barely take your clothes off. It's like you're fucking ashamed. And obviously what it was my Nana Margaret had imbibed the social conservatism of the 40s and the 50s, but he was desperate to break free from those sexual shackles. But he was born in the wrong era. That was the tragedy. And then he started to get quite angry, and he said, "You're my wife, do as you're fucking told." And she got really worried at that point, because he thought it was 1955. And back then, it was alright for a man to rape his wife. Golden era, wasn't it, guys? You could blow cigarette smoke into the face of your newborn baby because cancer hadn't been invented. Getting pissed up and punching your wife in the face was your obligation as a husband, wasn't it? So yeah, she started to get quite worried at this point, and then she kept herself remarkably composed during this whole ordeal, and she said, "Wait until we get to the caravan. I'll make it worth your while. I'll give you a blowjob." And he went, "What's that?" Because obviously by 1955, the only sexual position he was acquainted with was the missionary. And so the joys of oral sex were a complete mystery to him. And so Jane then proceeded to explain the mechanics of fellatio to him. And he went, "Oh, I didn't know you could do it like that." And then Jane then proceeded to come out with a list of increasingly adventurous sex acts she was going to perform on him when they got to the caravan. And at first he was sort of outraged and appalled and offended by some of the stuff that she was saying, because, you know, even though he was desperate for sexual liberation, he was still a man of his time. And all that sort of shame and self-disgust about sex is ingrained in people, and it's hard to free yourself from it. But after a short period of time, he showed himself to be remarkably receptive to experimenting with his sexuality. And by the end, Jane had managed to persuade him to let her tie him up, put a ball gag in his mouth, and fuck him up the arse with a dildo. And that is an image I've never been able to get out of my head. My elderly, demented grandfather being sodomised by my 17-year-old cousin in a caravan in Wales. And looking back on that episode in hindsight, I don't know which is more disturbing. The sexual chemistry between my cousin and my grandfather, or the amount of sexual experience she'd accumulated by the age of 17. Because she'd only been legal for 14 months, but already she'd swung on the full pendulum of human sexuality. And the way that story resolved itself is he became lucid again, and he came off the motorway, and Jane took over the driving and drove home on the side roads. And there's no doubt about it, like, Jane was an absolute star that day, because not only did she prevent a fatal car crash, she also successfully liberated my grandfather from the repressive social constraints of the 1950s. And I think that's an achievement worthy in itself, to be honest. And she went on to have some success in her acting career as well, Jane, under the stage name Lena Headey. She played a character called Cersei Lannister in a TV series called The Throne Games, or something like that. You might have heard of it. And I've seen a couple of episodes of that TV show, and in it, her character has to have an incestuous relationship with their brother, doesn't he? And when she was auditioning for the role, the casting director gave her a questionnaire. One of the questions was, have you ever had or considered having an incestuous relationship with an immediate member of your family? And next to the question there's a little box where you put a tick or a cross, and in brackets it said, preferred but not essential. And she put a tick, and that is how she got the role. There was no way Jane would ever have got to play Cersei Lannister had it not been for that experience in the car. I made that up, didn't I? That didn't really happen, did it? My cousin isn't Cersei Lannister, and my granddad didn't have Alzheimer's. It wasn't a joke about Alzheimer's in the end, was it? It was a joke about attitudes towards sex in different eras. And that's the thing about the #MeToo campaign now, that a lot of these people who are saying stuff, they have attitudes towards sex that are not dissimilar to those of my grandparents' generation, because they want sex to be a taboo again. They want people to feel embarrassed and ashamed by sex. And, you know, they're sort of conflating sort of things like, you know, looking at a woman in a sexual way and with rape and stuff like that. I don't know what the big deal is about rape anyway, because I've raped about 5 or 6 women now, and so long as you apologise, send a message the next day, you know, sorry about that, I was drunk.
Say sorry, mate.
You normally get a reply saying, you know,
from your wife.
No, no, I raped your wife, Rich. You normally get a reply the next day saying, no worries.
It's not rape if she knows it.
That's true. If she has an orgasm, that prevents it from being rape. Yeah, you get a message the next day saying, no worries, smiley face. Obviously there's a difference, isn't there, between that attitude and, you know, getting pissed up and sending a message at 3 in the morning asking for sex and then waking up the next day going, oh, for fuck's sake, what have I done? You know, and I don't think it's not misogynistic to point out the difference between that and, you know, plying a 12-year-old girl with crack and systematically raping her for years. Because, you know, it's not the same thing, is it? And it's not misogynistic to point out the difference. And that's the thing, like, you know, the hashtag #MeToo campaign, it allows people like Suzanne Moore of the Guardian newspaper to write articles where she says that she hates men and she finds all aspects of male sexuality detestable and that she should be allowed to say this because of free speech. But then a man says something like, I don't think looking at a woman in a sexual way and making her feel uncomfortable is a sex crime. She demands that he be silenced and called out for misogyny. And I don't think that's acceptable. And I think Suzanne Moore should be called out for displaying exactly the same kind of ignorance as a sort of bigoted racist who makes no distinction between radical jihadi terrorists and individual Muslims. Because she makes no distinction between individual men and the patriarchy. And I don't think she should be allowed to get away with that. And I think The Guardian should be fucking ashamed of itself for publishing that kind of bile. Because it is the language of Fox News and the Daily Mail. Sorry about that, I've just been waiting to do that for so long, to call out Suzanne Moore in public. It's just, yeah, thanks. It's like when you've got a teacher at school who you really hate and eventually you go up to him and call him a cunt to his face. You know, it's sort of like mixed emotions, isn't it? You know there'll be repercussions, but at the same time you just feel so alive for having done it. Yeah. So yeah, other things about the hashtag #MeToo campaign. Woody Allen. The way they went after Woody Allen. Sorry, this next bit is quite serious. Goes on for about 5 minutes in quite a serious way. So if you want to sit this bit out and go to the bar or something, get a drink. Okay. Sorry. I'm getting quite hot now. Yeah, okay, no, fuck that. I'll just do the angry rant about... Do the angry rant.
Angry rant! I want angry rant!
I'm gonna stop after that. They started to like try and discredit like works of art because like, you know, the whole Woody Allen thing, like, oh, Woody Allen's a paedophile, therefore all his films are shit now. Kevin Spacey's a sex offender, therefore you can't watch House of Cards anymore, it's no longer acceptable. You can't laugh at the humour of Louis C.K. anymore because of what he did. And that's a very disturbing thing that I think they're doing. Because like, if you follow that to its logical conclusion, you're going to have to discredit hundreds, if not thousands of years of Western culture, art, music and literature because the people who made it were a bit fucked up in some way. So like, they're not really sort of... I mean, what if Tolstoy had been a rapist? Does that mean War and Peace is no longer a great novel? What if Shakespeare had been a paedophile? We no longer study that in schools anymore. No, so they're just not thinking it through. They're just sort of going on Facebook with these angry fucking rants all the time about, oh, we've got to condemn people on Facebook. Oh, and they make all these fucking memes with bogus statistics and facts that haven't been checked. They're not thinking it through. Just on Facebook. Oh, I'm going to go on Facebook. Here's the A to the Wikipedia A to Z, the greatest artist who ever lived in Western civilization. Oh, A, let's start with that Angelo, Michelangelo, let's start with him. What have we got, what does it say? Oh, Michelangelo, paint the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, one of the greatest artworks of the Renaissance era. Oh, says here that Michelangelo used to paint pictures of his cock in a pre-Raphaelite style, even though the pre-Raphaelite movement didn't begin for another 300 years, but I didn't check the facts, I didn't do any fucking research. Michelangelo used to paint pictures of his cock and hand them out to the nuns during evening mass, and they were all outraged and appalled and scared. The Sistine Chapel is now tainted by abuse. I'm going to start a Facebook campaign to have the Sistine Chapel destroyed. Oh, what does Suzanne Moore think about that? Oh, she agrees with me. Oh, who else is there? Gaudi, the architect who designed the neo-Gothic cathedral Sagrada Familia in Barcelona. Oh, it wasn't a cathedral, it was a minor basilica, but I don't know the fucking difference because I haven't done any research. Turns out, Sagrada Familia was built by construction workers who used to wolf whistle women walking down the street, shouting, "Get your tits out for the lads!" And that's a hate crime now. Sagrada Familia should be destroyed. Oh, who else is there? Sir Christopher Wren, the architect who redesigned the City of London after the Great Fire of the 16th century. But it was the 17th century, but I didn't check the facts. Oh, turns out Sir Christopher Wren used to get pissed and grope the testicles of his male equerry and ask if he could bun him, like Kevin Spacey did. The City of London condones rape. People who live in London condone rape. They should all leave. I'm going to start a Facebook campaign to have the City of London destroyed by a nuclear warhead. Hashtag Nuke London. Oh, what does Suzanne Moore think about that? Oh, it was only a man being abused. She doesn't give a shit. Who else is there? Samuel Johnson, the Enlightenment thinker and writer, who spent 10 years compiling the English dictionary. 8 years! 8 years! Turns out that Samuel Johnson used to keep pornographic lithographs in his study depicting women with small breasts who looked underage even though they weren't. Samuel Johnson is a paedophile! The English dictionary is now totally discredited. Every single word in the English language has now been tainted by abuse. I'm going to live stream myself on Facebook ranting about how nobody should speak English anymore, but I can't rant in English, so I'll have to rant in another language instead. Es gibt keine Hoffnung, wir sind alle zum Scheitern verurteilt. Right, that's it. Thank you very much for putting up with that. Keep me safe.